Hey friend, Lane here. This is Preaching Donkey. We're going to talk today about how to ditch your plan last minute and preach either an entirely different message or change a significant part of your message right there in the moment. How do you do that when you feel like God is leading you to do that? What are the kind of best practices that surround that? We're going to talk about that right now. My name is Lane, like I said, and this is Preaching Donkey. Be sure to subscribe to this channel if you like these videos. Give them a like, give this video a like, and also leave a comment. Let's get the conversation going. Not too long ago, I preached a message, and right before I got up to preach, like I was sitting on the front row, couple songs left, that moment where you're sitting there and you're about to get up on stage to preach. The worship is going on, you're singing, you're participating, but in your mind, in your heart, you're really mulling over what's about to happen. You're about to get on stage, you're about to preach, and so you're thinking about what you're going to say first, you're thinking about your points, and I just had this feeling like the introduction of my message is just not fitting. It's not going to work. It's not where I feel like God is leading me to go with it. And I felt like I needed to tell a completely different story, introduce my sermon in a completely different way that I had not rehearsed, that I had not thought through, that I had not prepared, but it was what I felt like needed to happen. And so it got me thinking, what are the best practices for when this needs to happen? What are the things that we need to keep in mind? Because this happens, if you preach with any regularity, this happens where either you feel like, man, what I prepared, I just wasn't on the same wavelength with the Holy Spirit, or maybe something just changed during the week and here I am and I feel like I need to say something differently or I need to go a completely different direction. What do? Well, I want to give you a few things to keep in mind for when these things happen, how to prepare for them, and what to do when in the last minute you feel like you need to change your plan. The first thing is prepare well, okay? Prepare well, because the better prepared you are, the easier it is for you to deviate from your plan. And I know this might seem counterintuitive because you think, well, why would I need to prepare well if I'm just going to change it altogether? The reason why is because the more prepared you are, the more you have internalized the message, the easier it is to say, I'm going to change this part, I'm going to change that part, and I'm not having to do all this mental gymnastics to try to figure out where I am in the sermon and what I was going to say versus what I'm going to say now. You know the message, you understand it. So if you need to change a particular part of the message, then you can. When you prepare well, you're not wondering how the sermon is going to wrap up. You're not worried about your first lines. You really understand kind of what the message is supposed to do, what you're supposed to get out of it. Now, if you change the message entirely, if you just get up and say, we're going to preach a totally different message today, then preparing well doesn't do a whole lot for you. It's really only there if you're just changing significant portions of the message. The more prepared you are, the better. I still believe that the more prepared you are, the better it is. And I would say changing up the entire message, I would only do that in rare instances. More on that later. So the first thing is prepare well. Number two, don't make a habit of it, okay? Your listeners, your audience, your church will begin to question your sincerity. I'm just telling you, they're gonna question your sincerity if you default to ditching the plan too often. They'll wonder if you even have a plan, right? They'll start to think, gosh, I mean, this person they're always off the cuff. They're always just kind of getting up and saying, well, now we're going to do something different. Not to mention the people running your media, like your slides, your videos, etc., your creative teams, your worship people, they're going to grow weary of your ever-changing plan because it has kind of a ripple effect through the whole process when any element, but especially when the sermon changes, it kind of changes up the whole day. And so if you're always doing this, people are going to grow tired of it. And it just looks like you must not be locked in. You must not be tuned into what God is leading you to do. The third thing is to avoid announcing your change of plans to the church. Okay? So my contention is you don't need to get up in front of your church and say, all right, everybody, listen. Okay, we're going to do something totally different today. I don't think that's necessary. And here's why I feel that way. This happened as a near constant in the churches I grew up in. The pastor would get up and he would say something like this: well, I had a message prepared today, but I feel like God is leading me to speak on something entirely different this morning or this evening. So instead of Romans, go ahead and turn to First Kings. And this kind of warning can make people feel like they kind of feel like they expect the sermon to be bad because it's off the cuff. Like they're expecting it to be bad, so it probably will be in their minds because they think, okay, if he's coming up with this last minute. I remember I would sit there and I would think, I would almost be kind of rating the sermon based on how well I felt like he was able to put a sermon together last minute, in the moment. I would sit there and kind of think, man, can he do this? So I wasn't even thinking about the content as much as I was thinking about, this wasn't what he was supposed to preach. I wonder how he's going to do, right? And so it just kind of, it makes it just about the process and not about the content. And I try to avoid any time you can avoid giving people insider baseball, giving people the metadata. If you can avoid that, then what it does is it removes that mental distraction and just allows them to hear your content. Because most likely, if you don't tell people that this is last minute, if you don't tell people that you've changed something, they're not going to know, because guess what? They didn't see your sermon notes that you wrote for your sermon, unless, of course, you provided a handout and the notes are different. In that case, you can avoid it. But again, that's why I would say to the extent that you can avoid this distraction, please do. Now, there's a related part, there's a related principle, and this applies where if you get up and say, well, and this happened a lot when I was growing up. And this can particularly happen when you're just pressed for time. There's a tendency to want to apologize for it. And here's what it sounds like. You get up and you say, well, I didn't have a lot of time to prepare this week, so bear with me through this. Okay. All right. Let me speak for your congregation. All right. No, we don't want to bear with you. All you've said is that for the next 30 to 40 minutes, you're going to waste our time with the jumbled mess that you managed to stumble through. Does that sound harsh? Okay, good. It's meant to. The only thing worse than not preparing well to speak to God's people is telling them that you didn't prepare well, okay? Leave that out, okay? You don't need to get up and say, bear with me. Now, this doesn't just apply to preaching. This applies to any form of public speaking, okay? Anytime you're speaking to an audience, you never want to say, I didn't have a chance to really do well at this, or I'm not a good speaker, or I don't really know what I'm doing. You always want to avoid that. Even if it's true, don't say it. And here's why. 1/2 of your listeners will respond how I described above, okay? They'll respond with kind of a, why are you wasting my time? If you're not competent, why am I listening to you? I got things to do. This is dumb. The other, more empathetic half will respond by feeling badly for you, okay? While cringing through what they hope is not an embarrassing and awkward experience for you. So they're going to be sitting there going, oh gosh, I hope they get through this because, so they're going to be kind of rooting for you and cheering for you and hoping that it's not too bad of an experience for you. But guess what? They're not going to hear much of what you say because they're going to be thinking about your feelings. They're going to be thinking about how awkward it is for them. The other half, the more harsh half, is going to be sitting there going, this is dumb. And so you just want to avoid that. So needless to say, you don't want either one of these reactions. So you set the tone. As the speaker, you set the tone for how people feel when they're listening to you. So avoid giving them reasons to be distracted with unhelpful and unnecessary thoughts, okay? Number 4, only preach an entirely different sermon in rare instances, okay? So I hinted to this earlier, but first of all, I'm not saying God can't or doesn't lead in this way. But all things being equal, I don't recommend preaching an entirely different message than the one you prepared, except in rare cases. If a tragedy struck your town, if there's some big news event that you just feel like has to be addressed because it touches on something related to faith or your community, or there's just something that you feel like we as a church at this time, this has to be addressed, then that's an exception. But generally speaking, changing up the plan entirely is to be avoided if possible. So if you notice that you're doing this a lot with some regularity, you should consider how tuned in you are to God's leading. Are you following Him through the week in preparation? Are you listening to His voice? Because I truly believe that God speaks to us in our preparation, not just in the moment. Okay, so it's not like God can't lead you in the moment. He can and He does. But I believe that God can and does lead you when you prepare, when it's Tuesday and you're reading the text and you're studying it and you're putting together points and you're thinking through how it's all going to come together. And so if you're always changing up the plan, I just wonder, where is that preparation, Because it's going to happen. You're going to change up your plan, and that's okay. But if it's happening a lot, and if you're changing the entire sermon a lot, I just wonder, where's the prayer, and where's the being locked into God's Spirit when you prepare. Okay, so you want to avoid that, because I think it's an unnecessary distraction. Number 5, if you know in advance, let the right people know. So maybe you decide this on Saturday night and you just know, like, you know what, I'm scrapping tomorrow. Okay, make sure your worship leader knows, the people who advance your slides, if you have that, anyone involved in follow-up or prayer afterwards. Make sure the right people have warning if you can give it to them, because you want to make sure that no one is caught off guard who really should know. You don't necessarily need to let the audience know if it's not necessary, but you need to let anybody who's a part of the process know, so that they don't feel like they're caught off guard. Number 6, preach as if it's what you prepared all along. Okay? If you change up only parts of your sermon, but the main points are the same, you'll likely be the only one who knows. Okay? Nobody needed to know that this was a different introduction. It was a different story that I had planned. That's not really necessary. I just need to get up. If it's an effective introduction to the sermon, if it's an effective story, I just need to get up and say it, because they don't need to know. They don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. All it does is just add unnecessary information and clutter the process. What we want is the most distraction-free method. We want the most distraction-free presentation, so that people can just hear what God is saying to them and they can do something with it. And the more we can remove some of these elements that just take away from that, the better. So no one knows what's on your personal preaching notes but you anyway. So the things that only you can see, nobody knows what's on that. So if you change up the plan, it could go unnoticed to your audience unless you tell them. So that's my contention. Just don't tell them. Just preach as if it's what you prepared all along. And in those rare instances where you're preaching an entirely different message, and even if you have to tell people because the notes don't match, still preach that as if it's what you prepared all along, because you've committed to it. You've decided in that moment, this is what you feel like the Lord is telling you to do. So commit. I mean, just fully commit to it. Because if you hesitate, it's kind of like taking a turn in a car. If you hesitate, you're going to spin out. But if you just go for it, then you're going to be a lot better off. And then number 7, pray. Okay? Pray. I only recommend changing up the plan if you really feel like God is leading in a different direction. Okay? So you must be in prayer during the process to know exactly where you should take the sermon. This is a prayerful situation. This is something that you have to be tuned in and locked into what God is telling you in the moment. And so let's review. The first thing is we're going to prepare well, because that just helps everything. Okay, I'm always for that. Number 2, don't make a habit of it. All right. This is something that that you're always doing. Then sharpen up the process. Make sure that you're more locked in during the week. Number 3, avoid announcing the change of plans to your church, and especially don't tell them, don't give them a reason to be mad at you or feel badly for you. Okay, avoid saying things like, I'm not really prepared, I didn't really have time. Don't say that. Okay, and avoid announcing the change of plans if you don't need to. Now, this is not insincere. This is just something they don't need to know. You're not withholding anything from them that they need to know. This is just, it's just not necessary for you to say. And so that's why I would avoid announcing those change of plans, because it can come across like, all right, here we go. Number 4, only preach an entirely different sermon in rare instances. Okay. Changing up the whole thing should be a rare occurrence. Number 5, if you know in advance, let the right people know. Number 6, preach as if it's what you prepared all along. And then number 7, pray. Don't forget to pray. So that's the 7 things that I would say for what you should do if you want to ditch your plan at the last minute, if you feel led to do that. Now, you might be saying, well, listen, I really want to be prepared in such a way where this doesn't happen. Okay. And I want that for you as well, which is why I have a free gift for you. It's called the 21-Day Guide to Creating Killer Sermons. If you go to preachingdonkey.com/21days, you'll find that guide there. It's a PDF. It's a free download. And what it will do for you is it gives you a systematic process for preparing a sermon. And I think it's a simple but effective process of first do this, then do this. It kind of helps you walk through and make an outline. It helps you study the text. It helps you prepare so that you are ready to go and you have everything you need to get started preparing your sermon. It kind of brings it to a system so that hopefully this kind of thing becomes a rare instance, because it helps you to even craft a outline that takes your people on an irresistible journey and then really make your sermon come alive, which is pretty exciting. So go check it out, and I would love to give that to you. So preachingdonkey.com/21days. Thanks for checking out this video. We'll be back soon. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Give this video a like and leave a comment. How have you experienced this exact thing? What do you do when you feel like God is leading in a different direction? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember, if God can speak through a donkey, he can speak through you. We'll see you next time.